All right, today we are going way, way back, over 4,000 years to be exact. We're heading to ancient Mesopotamia to tackle a fascinating puzzle. How on earth did they build this massive, complex empire that lasted for centuries, all without anything we'd call money?
I mean, really think about that for a second. From where we're standing today, it just seems impossible, right? Imagine your life, trying to pay rent, buy groceries, get a loan, with no cash, no credit cards, no apps. The whole world would just grind to a halt. And yet, these guys, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, they didn't just manage it, they did it on a massive scale.
And this is where we get to the real paradox of it all. Because on one side, you've got everything that screams advanced civilization, right? We're talking sophisticated cities, complex laws, people with specialized jobs, a trade network that spanned thousands of miles. But then on the other side, they were missing the one thing we think is absolutely essential to make all that work: money. No coins, no bills. So how in the world did they pull it off?
Okay, so to figure out their solution, we've first got to understand their world. We're zooming in on Mesopotamia, way back in the 3rd millennium BCE. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And this place, it wasn't just a location on a map. It was a kind of economic machine, one that was born out of a really, really big challenge.
So here was their fundamental problem. The land itself was incredibly fertile. It was perfect for growing tons of grain and raising herds of sheep. But, and this is a big but, they had almost no trees for wood, no stone for building, and no metal for tools. This huge imbalance basically forced their hand. They had to get creative and build a system to trade what they had a lot of for everything they desperately needed. And the system they came up with? Well, it wasn't just one simple thing. Scholars call it a dual economy. The easiest way to think about it is like two engines running the whole society at the same time. On one track, you have the huge, centralized institutions, the palace and the temple. And running right alongside them, you have this whole other bustling sector of independent families and producers.
So, the palace and temple, they basically acted like massive corporations. They were the ones controlling the import of all those raw materials, like metal, and they oversaw the making of all the fancy, high-status stuff. The non-elite sector, though, that was the backbone of the everyday economy. These were regular households, using local stuff like clay and wool to make all the utilitarian goods that everyone actually needed. And even though they seem separate, these two parts of the economy were completely intertwined.
Okay, so if they didn't have money, how did they actually trade for all those resources they were missing? Well, the answer was simple, but genius. They turned their farming surplus into a powerful export engine.
They looked at what they had tons of, which was wool from their massive flocks and grain from their fertile fields, and they transformed it. You had these huge workshops, a lot of them staffed by women, just churning out high-quality textiles that were super in demand all over the ancient world. So they'd ship out these finished goods, and in return they'd get the raw materials they needed so badly. We're talking copper from all the way in Oman, timber from the mountains, and even precious stones from as far away as Afghanistan.
So who was managing all of this complex international trade? Well, they were called the Damgar. But just calling them merchants doesn't really do them justice. A better translation is something like man of business or business agent. See, a Damgar might be working on commission for the temple one day, but the next he could be handling trade for private citizens or even running his own family business. They were these incredibly flexible, multi-talented people who made the whole system work. And this really brings us to a super important point, and this quote just nails it. After all this talk about palaces and international trade and business agents, you have to remember, the entire grand, magnificent structure was built on the backs of ordinary people. It rested on the household economies of simple shepherds and farmers. Their production was literally the fuel that powered the entire imperial engine.
Okay, so we've got this complex system of making stuff and trading it. But how do you keep track of all of that without money to just give everything a simple price? This is where the Mesopotamians unleashed their first superpower. They basically invented accounting. And I mean the very foundation of the financial world we live in today. So take a look at this. It's a cuneiform tablet. And yeah, it might just look like a slab of clay with some scratches on it, but you are looking at one of the most important inventions in human history. This one, for example, is basically a pay stub. It's a record of wages paid in grain to women who were weavers. And this isn't some super rare thing. Archaeologists have found hundreds of thousands of these. These people were absolutely obsessed with keeping records. And when I say they recorded everything, I mean
everything. Any kind of deal or obligation had to be written down in clay and signed off by witnesses. We're talking partnership agreements, rent and sales contracts, wages paid to workers, loans. They even recorded marriage contracts, which back then were pretty much commercial agreements. Their entire economy ran on information. Almost nothing happened without a record of it. But, just having detailed records isn't quite enough. You still have a problem. How do you value different things? A pile of grain obviously isn't worth the same as a bar of copper. This is where their second brilliant innovation comes in, and it worked perfectly with their obsession for record keeping. Now, this is the key. They used silver as their universal standard of value, but, and this is super important, it wasn't currency like we think of it. You didn't walk into a market with a little piece of silver to buy bread. Instead, silver was the abstract measuring stick. It was like the dollar of its day. So a worker's wages might be written down in shekels of silver, but they'd actually get paid in barley, just the amount of barley that was worth that much silver. It gave them a common language to compare the value of absolutely anything, from a single sheep to an entire house. So this raises a really interesting question. Was this system really moneyless? And honestly, it's a hot debate among historians. Some scholars will argue that these standardized stamped bars of silver they used were basically the world's first coins. But others push back saying, hold on, those stamps probably just guaranteed that the silver was pure, not that it was a specific weight. That would mean they weren't true coins you could just pass around. The whole system really lived in this fascinating gray area, somewhere between simple barter and a modern money economy. So how did this all come about? Well, it didn't happen overnight. It looks like it was a slow, gradual evolution. First, you had the long-distance traders using silver to value their goods. Then, the big temples started using it to value everything in their massive storerooms. Pretty soon, wages for big projects were being calculated in silver, even if they were paid out in grain. From there, it's a pretty small leap for local craftsmen to start pricing their own goods in silver. And finally, it just became the standard for all lending and borrowing. It was a totally organic process of an idea catching on. So when you put these two huge ideas together, the obsessive record-keeping on one hand and this abstract silver standard on the other, you get something truly remarkable. You get an economy that wasn't built on physical things being exchanged. It was built on promises, on obligations. It was an economy built on trust.
And believe me, this system of trust was incredibly sophisticated. Lending was a huge business, and it was a perfectly normal thing to do. I mean, everybody was doing it, from the king all the way down to slaves. And get this, look at these typical interest rates. 20% a year for a loan of silver, and up to 33% for a loan of grain. I mean, those are the kinds of numbers you see today on high-risk finance, and for them, it was just business as usual over 4,000 years ago.
Okay, but this next part is what I find truly mind-blowing. They actually developed negotiable debt. This clay tablet here, it basically says, hey, I owe this much silver, and I promise to pay it back with interest to whoever shows up with this tablet. Think about that. That is a bearer bond. It's an IOU that can be bought and sold. It's a financial instrument we think of as totally modern, and they were using them back in 2090 BCE. It's proof that their entire system was based on legally binding transferable promises. And all of this brings us right back to our big question. What the Mesopotamian economy shows us, maybe, is that money isn't really a physical thing at all. At its very core, it's a technology of trust. It's just a shared story that we all agree on about value, and it's built on a foundation of accounting and trust. The Mesopotamians didn't have cash, but they had the two things that really truly matter: a way to measure value and a system to guarantee the promise of future payment. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the ancient world, be sure to support our channel by liking the video and subscribing if you're interested by the First Civilizations archives.